Welcome back, everyone. Ready to dive into some really fascinating stuff? We're about to explore Michel Serres and his book, Biogea. It's a total mind bender, challenging how we see the Earth and ourselves.
It really makes you question everything, like we always talk about nature as if it's something separate from us.
Right, like that vacation spot we visit to escape from, real life.
Exactly. But Sarah says, nope, not that simple. He's all about how interconnected everything is. He calls this interconnected web the biogea. It's the air we breathe, the tiniest little bugs, the whole planet, really, and us. We're not just visiting, we're part of the crew.
Wow, okay. So not just a vacation spot, but like we live here. But it's more than just like existing on the same planet, right?
Yeah, right. And that's where it gets really interesting. He says we need to experience this interconnectedness, like really open our senses to what the Earth is telling us.
So like appreciating a beautiful sunset, feeling the wind in your hair.
Kind of, but he takes it way further. Like, Serres actually felt the Loma Prieta earthquake back in 1989. And it wasn't just, oh, that was scary. It totally changed his perception.
You mean like how he saw the world?
Exactly. He became so attuned to the Earth's movements. Imagine like a human seismograph.
Whoa, okay, that's intense. So he wants us to tap into that, feel those vibrations.
He wants us to be aware of the Earth's language, yeah. Because sometimes it's a whisper, sometimes it's a roar, and we have to listen to both.
Speaking of roars, Serres doesn't shy away from the, shall we say, less peaceful side of nature.
Not at all. Like, he compares natural disasters, floods, earthquakes, to human violence.
Oh, wow. So is he saying they're the same thing?
It's more like he's challenging us to think about responsibility. Like that story he tells about the peasant stuck on a haystack during this massive flood. It makes you wonder, is it nature's fault? Is it our fault?
That's heavy stuff.
It really is. And it goes beyond individual blame, too. Sarah says harming the environment is like this, like a societal crime against the biogea. It's like putting society itself on trial for its impact.
Okay, so we're all responsible for how we treat this interconnected web.
Okay.
This is a lot to process, honestly. How do we even begin to wrap our heads around all this?
Well, maybe a good place to start is with those who know how to handle unpredictability. Right? Like sailors, for example, out there battling the elements.
Yeah, good point. Actually, now that you mention it, didn't Sir spend a lot of time at sea?
He did. And he uses those experiences to help explain the biogea, especially when it comes to navigating all the chaos and constant change.
I bet. Wasn't he caught in, like, a really bad storm once?
Oh, yeah. He tells this crazy story. You're right. A massive storm almost died. You can practically feel the boat rocking, the waves crashing. It's intense.
And how do you deal with that?
He talks about this feeling of incredible peace, which sounds odd, right? In the middle of this raging storm.
Super odd. Peace isn't the first thing that comes to mind.
Right. But he also felt this, deep sense of connection with the crew, like they were all in it together, facing this powerful force.
So it's more than just surviving the storm. It's about facing that chaos and finding something deeper.
Yes. And maybe even finding connection with others in the process. It's about learning to move with those rhythms, the constant ebb and flow of the biogea, instead of fighting against it.
Okay, I think I get that. But these challenges, they're not always as dramatic as a life or death storm, right?
Definitely not.
Yeah.
Sometimes those challenges are way more subtle, almost invisible.
Okay, like what? Give me an example.
Well, Serres was super observant, noticing tiny details most of us wouldn't even think twice about.
Okay, so like super detective, noticing things.
Yeah. He was sailing through the Suez Canal once and he sees red and black cockroaches.
Cockroaches. That's your example. Sorry, I'm not sure I've seen the concept.
Okay, hear me out. Seems like a small thing, but think about it. Those roaches weren't supposed to be there. They were hitching a ride on the ship.
Ah, stowaways.
Right. Ended up in this completely new environment, far from home, disrupting the natural order of things.
So it's about those unintended consequences. Even the small things we do can have these ripple effects on a larger scale.
Yeah, exactly. It's a good reminder that we're all connected, even to those little roaches. And it gets even bigger, like when Serres talks about invasive species, how they spread and disrupt ecosystems. He links that to human history too, with our own patterns of expansion and conflict.
Whoa, so you're saying there's a connection between those roaches and human history. That's pretty profound.
It is. It makes you wonder, are we hardwired to disrupt things, or can we learn to live more harmoniously with the biogea? And that's where this new kind of knowledge comes in that Serres is always talking about.
So we need a different way of seeing things.
Totally. He says we can't just study the Biogea from a distance, like it's some specimen under a microscope. We got to engage with it, listen to it.
So it's about more than just, like, facts and figures.
Way more. It's about understanding our place in this web of life and acting accordingly, It's a tall order, but that's the challenge Serres puts forth.
Okay, so we've talked about listening to the earth, navigating this Biogea, but where do we even go from here? Like, how do we actually live this interconnectedness that Serres is talking about?
Well, he talks a lot about the importance of perspective, how a shift in how we see things can completely change our understanding.
Okay, so like having an aha moment.
Yeah, exactly. He calls them encounters. These moments that open us up to new possibilities, like walking through a doorway and suddenly, boom, everything looks different.
Well, it could be anything, really.
It could be meeting someone who challenges your assumptions or having an experience in nature that just blows your mind. Like Serres talks about meeting this physicist, Francis Perrin, and his wife, and it totally transformed his thinking.
He makes it sound like this life-changing encounter.
It really was. And it wasn't even just about the science they discussed. It was more about their whole way of seeing the world, the connections they made.
So it's about embracing those different ways of seeing those different perspectives.
Right. And recognizing that our own perspective isn't the only one, or even necessarily the right one. Serres actually tells this funny story about this couple. They see the word love, but they read it as vélo.
Vélo, what does that even mean?
It means bicycle in French.
Okay, so how do you mistake love for bicycle?
Well, that's the point. Their perspective, their background, it literally made them see something completely different. And it's a good reminder that we all have these blind spots, these velo moments, where our assumptions can really trip us up.
So we need to watch out for those velo moments, those times when we might be misinterpreting things based on our limited perspective.
Exactly. And that's why Serres is calling for this new kind of knowledge, one that recognizes complexity. It's not about breaking everything down into these neat little categories, but seeing those connections, the relationships between things.
So more like a web than a hierarchy.
Yes. And this applies to everything, not just science. It's about art, music, our whole understanding of the world.
That's pretty amazing when you think about it. Like, we're all part of this giant interconnected system, this Biogea.
We are.
Yeah.
And it's constantly changing, evolving. And honestly, I think that's what makes it so beautiful.
It's a bit humbling too, right? Knowing we're just one part of this much larger story.
It is. But it's also empowering because we have the ability to learn, to adapt, to find our place within this web of life. And who knows, maybe even contribute something meaningful in the process.
I like that. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Biogea, I think the big question Serres leaves us with is, are we really listening to what the earth is telling us? Are we paying attention to those whispers, those roars, those velo moments that challenge how we see the world?
Such a good question. Because if this Biogea is constantly speaking, well, we better make sure we're listening.